What would you do if one night, deep in the melting snow of a forgotten forest, you heard a voice calling out, not quite human, not quite beast, but trembling with pain and hope? In 1991, at the edge of the Kaniksu woods, a widowed woman named Iris Malloy discovered a creature unlike any legend, wounded, caged, yet with eyes that shimmered like amber, filled with sorrow, gratitude, and something unmistakably human. She should have run, but she didn't. She stayed, and what no one expected was this. That same creature, Orin, would later save lives, pull a man from a raging flood, shield his kin from wildfire, and even rescue the very hunter who once tried to kill him. Not with fury, but with mercy. This isn't a story about monsters. It's about what makes us human: compassion, sacrifice, and the quiet power of forgiveness. Taken from the true accounts of Briar Hollow's residents, this tale will stay with you long after the final frame fades. So tell us, where in the world are you watching from? How far can a story like this travel? One built not on fear, but empathy. From the misty hills of Idaho to the heart of wherever you are, we send you our warmest hello. Under the thawing hush of early March, when the snow in Kaniksu forest began to pull back from the earth like a breath slowly released, Iris Malloy stood at her kitchen sink, hands damp from the dishes she hadn't finished, eyes caught on the mist curling through the pines beyond the window. The ground outside was uneven with patches of slush and frost-bitten grass, soft where the ice had begun to let go. Her breath clouded the glass as she leaned forward, listening. At first it was nothing. The ticking of the old clock, the slow drip of water from the faucet, the whisper of wind slipping through the eaves. Then something else. Faint, out of place, a sound buried under the wind, not quite animal, not quite human. A low, pained moan, like someone trying not to scream. She stayed still, back pressed to the counter, pulse climbing as if her own memory had stirred it. The memory of that winter 5 years ago, when the mountain came down and buried everything. Her husband's truck, the cabin wall, the trail behind them. She'd heard sounds like that before, from him, just once. Before the silence took over, the kettle whistled, sudden and sharp, and she jolted. With a shaky hand, she shut it off and reached for the oil lamp. The flashlight hadn't worked since October. She didn't like the way batteries died in this house, how the dark seemed to stretch longer than it should. Throwing a flannel over her shoulders, she lit the lamp, cracked the back door open, and stepped into the wet night air. The wind was thick with pine and rot, the snow melting into rivulets that soaked the ground beneath her boots. The noise came again, closer this time. A drawn-out breath, broken in the middle. It wasn't a bear. Bears didn't sound like they were asking for help. She moved slowly, the lamp held low, casting a soft orange glow across the melting snow. The light flickered as it caught on trees and ice, and something massive slumped against a stump just beyond the tree line. At first, she couldn't see it clearly, just a shape, large and slumped, like a collapsed stack of firewood. Then the shape shifted, and the breath caught in her chest. It wasn't wood. It was a body. She stepped closer, the lamp trembling in her hand. The creature was taller than any man she'd ever seen, easily over 8 feet, even folded in on itself. Its fur was matted with blood and snow. One leg bent at a strange angle where a rusted steel trap bit into the flesh above the ankle. Steam curled up from its body like breath from a dying furnace. And then, the face. When her light caught it, she froze. It was not the face of a beast. It was the face of something terribly close to human. A wild man face, covered in thin, wet fur that let the pale skin show through. The eyes were amber, dulled but still lit from within. Full of pain, yes, but also something else. Recognition, a plea, as if it were begging her to see. Not just to look. She should have turned around. Should have run. Called someone. Locked the doors. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Her knees dipped, and she crouched beside it. The cold seeping up through the hem of her jeans. Breath shallow as she reached for the trap. The metal was jagged with rust. Blood had soaked the snow into a dark ring. She looked at its hands. Large, too large, fingers cracked and rough, but not claws, not paws, and its face again, the beard short, the mouth slightly open, jaw trembling. The amber eyes didn't blink. She whispered, "I'll help you," and wasn't sure who she was talking to, it or herself. It took an hour to get it onto the sled she'd rigged from an old stall door. Her hands were raw from the cold, arms aching from pulling. The snow beneath the body turned pink, then brown, then clear again. At one point she thought it might die. It let out a sound like a breath falling apart. But then it moved, barely, enough to shift its weight, enough to let her know it was still with her. The trek back to the cabin was uphill and cruel. The sled hit every root, every thawed patch of mud. She fell once, her knees hitting rock, and for a moment, she stayed there, staring up at the sky where the clouds moved heavy and slow. She wanted to scream. Instead, she dug in, stood up, and kept pulling. By the time she reached the yard, the lamp was nearly dead, the wind sharper. She didn't bring the creature inside the house. Not yet. The barn had been empty since the last mule died. She cleared a space near the old stove, still half full of wood from winter. As she opened the door to drag the sled in, her eye caught something down the road. Twin beams of a truck's headlights dipping behind the trees, vanishing too quickly to trace. Someone had seen. Someone was out there. She turned back to the creature, knelt beside it again, and for the first time, it closed its eyes. Inside the barn, the stove hissed and popped as the fire caught, throwing heat into the dark like a second heart starting to beat. Iris cut away the remnants of the trap, cleaned the wound with iodine and old towels, working by lantern light and silence. The creature didn't fight. It flinched, winced, but never reached for her. She didn't speak either. Not out loud. Her thoughts were too loud already. She wrapped the leg, tucked blankets around its massive chest, and paused when she heard it breathe out. Not in pain this time, but in relief. A soft, low rumble followed, so faint she thought it might be her own pulse. Then again, a hum, deep and slow, like a song with no words. She backed up slowly, heart caught between fear and wonder. It wasn't threatening. It was grieving, or remembering. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. She turned off the lamp, left only the fire, and stood by the barn door for a moment before stepping into the cold again. The house was darker than she remembered. Everything seemed quieter, like the world had gone still around this moment, waiting. She couldn't sleep. She sat in her chair by the window, fingers curled around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. The forest stretched out beyond the frost-glazed glass. Nothing moved, but somewhere deep in the woods, past the low ridges and runoff creeks, a faint glimmer of light returned. The eyes she'd seen, the blood in the snow, the old trap. It was all real, and someone had seen her take it in. At dawn, she stepped outside with the kettle water, walked toward the barn, and saw something strange by the fence. A small bundle resting against the wooden post, a neat clutch of fresh cattail reeds, still wet with morning dew. There were no prints around it, no sign of who left it, but it was there, waiting, as if placed with purpose. She stared at it, breath held, then slowly reached down and picked it up. The reeds were warm from the sun, tied with a strand of bark. No note, no trace. Inside the barn, the creature hadn't moved much, but its eyes opened as she entered, amber and clear now, tracking her. She set the reeds beside the blanket, not knowing why, only that it felt like the right thing to do. The creature looked at them, then at her, and this time, it didn't hum. It smiled, only slightly. A twitch at the corner of the mouth, the kind you see in people who have lived too long with silence. The kind that breaks your heart without asking. She sat beside it, quiet, not touching, not speaking. Somewhere in the woods beyond the trees, a low hum echoed faintly. Not a growl, not a howl. A resonance. Something else was listening, watching, and waiting. The morning after, the frost had thinned into threads of glass across the barn windows, and the old boards in the ceiling creaked with the shifting heat from the stove Iris had stoked before sunrise. Smoke curled up through the rafters in quiet ribbons. Outside, the light was pale and wet, the kind that made everything look like it had been forgotten in the rain. She stood at the threshold of the barn for a long moment, her hand resting on the door frame, letting the warmth inside mix with the cold from the yard. The creature, he, was still there, barely moved from where she'd left him, but the difference now was his breathing. Slower, calmer, not like the shallow hunted gasps from the night before. The blankets clung to the rise and fall of his chest. His leg was wrapped tight. She'd done her best, but the swelling was bad, and deep purple lines had begun to creep along the skin where the old rusted trap had torn into the muscle. She set down a basin of warm water and towels, whispering things she didn't realize she was saying. Not words meant to be heard, just sounds, meant to keep herself steady. She checked the dressing. The gash was raw but clean. The fur around it was damp, patchy. There were bruises along his back, one shoulder scraped and stiff with dried blood. When she touched the skin beneath the fur, he tensed, but didn't pull away. And for a moment, Iris felt something pass between them. Not understanding, not yet, but permission. He let her help. When she returned from the house with a pot of water and a plate, boiled eggs, venison jerky, a few blackberries from the freezer, she hesitated before stepping back inside. He was sitting up now, not fully, but braced on one elbow, his body massive even in the dim light. He didn't move when she approached, just watched her. Those same amber eyes, sharp but exhausted. She offered the plate without a word. He looked at the meat, then her, then back again. Slowly, he shook his head. It was a small motion, but clear, deliberate. Iris furrowed her brow, unsure. She took the berries and placed them on a small dish by his side, then poured warm water into a mason jar. He reached for it with slow fingers, curled around the glass. Drank, then looked at her again, this time tilting his head just slightly, like acknowledgement. Or thanks. The old barn was quiet that afternoon. Rain tapped at the roof in waves, and Iris sat in the corner on an overturned crate, arms crossed, her body aching from the pull of the previous night. Every hour or so she checked on him. Every hour he seemed a little more present, still silent, still watching. When dusk came, she lit the lantern again and made her way down the gravel path toward the woodshed, half muttering to herself about the dwindling firewood. It was habit. She spoke when things got too quiet, the kind of talking people do when they haven't been answered in years. She didn't notice the truck until it turned the bend, a beat-up Dodge, red paint dulled to rust, headlights flicking through mist. It rolled in slow, careful. Iris tensed, stepping aside as the driver's door opened with a creak. Gabe Harlan stepped out with a bundled stack of split logs in his arms and a sheepish grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Figured you might need a resupply," he said, adjusting the weight against his hip. "Road's turning to mush. Thought I'd get it to you before it floods again." Iris forced a smile, her eyes darting back toward the barn. "Appreciate it," she said, her voice a touch too calm. He caught it. He was young, mid-20s maybe, but not stupid. A wiry frame built from chopping wood, driving fence, digging ditches. The kind of quiet young man that didn't say much but noticed everything. As he stacked the wood by the porch, his eyes drifted toward the barn. Then to the muddy prints around the yard. Not hers. Larger, splayed, deep. "You have company?" he asked lightly. But there was tension beneath it. "Just a stray. Hurt bad," she replied too quickly. "What kind of stray leaves tracks like that?" Iris didn't answer. The silence pressed in. Gabe didn't push, but he didn't look away either. Finally, he said, "I saw something out past the lower ridge last night. Thought it was a buck at first. Then it stood up." She stayed quiet, her hands folded tight against her chest. "I won't tell anyone," he added. She nodded once, that was all. That night the wind picked up again. The old trees groaned. Rain slanted hard against the barn roof. Iris sat with him again. She still hadn't given him a name, not out loud, and tried to read from an old paperback, her voice slow, hesitant. The words felt silly in the space between them, but she read anyway. He watched. Not the book. Her. His eyes blinked slowly, the way people do when they're listening without needing to understand. Then, as she turned a page, she heard it. A low vibration, barely a hum. It came from him. It wasn't speech, not a language, but a sound with shape. A sound that moved through the air like a song half swallowed. It rumbled through the wood, the floor, the bones. A sound like memory. Iris froze, the book slipping shut in her lap. He stopped. She whispered, "Was that you?" He looked at her. Then, incredibly, nodded. She didn't sleep much that night. The sound followed her, curled into her ears, wrapped around her dreams. She woke before dawn, walked the perimeter of the barn, checked the doors. The yard was still, but near the back fence, where the tall grass had thinned, there was something waiting. A bundle, fresh cattails, again, placed gently, deliberately, just like before. And beside it, the faint indent of a boot print. Not hers, not Gabe's. She bent low, heart hammering, looked closer. No tread, no laces, wide, flat, heavy. She swallowed hard. Someone else had been here. When the sun finally rose, she found herself dialing the number she hadn't used in nearly 2 years. The line clicked, then rang, then crackled. "Porter Hale," came the voice on the other end. "Doc, it's Iris." A pause, then warmth. "Iris Malloy. Well, hell, I thought you were done with me." "Not quite," she said. "I need you to take a look at something." He arrived 2 hours later, boots still muddy from the last ranch call, satchel slung over his shoulder. He walked into the barn, looked at the creature for all of 3 seconds, and went still. Then, in a voice dry as old timber, he muttered, "That's no stray dog." "I know what it looks like," she said. He glanced at her. "Do you?" They didn't speak again for several minutes as he unpacked gauze, antiseptic, tweezers, thread. Iris explained what she could. The trap, the wound, the behavior, the refusal to eat meat, the sounds. Hale examined the leg, his brows pinched low, his mouth a line. Finally, he sat back on his heels. "You realize it's not going to survive out here like this," he said. "If the infection doesn't take it, someone else will." Iris looked at the creature. He was awake, alert, watching the two of them. "I'm not going to let him die," she said quietly. Doc Hale sighed. "That's not a him. That's not a bear. That's not a myth. That's something no one's ready to see. You keep him alive, you better be damn ready for what comes after." She didn't blink. "Then I'll be ready." He gave her a look that carried 20 years of weather and worry. But he didn't argue. Instead, he helped her clean the wound again, left behind supplies, and muttered something about checking in tomorrow. Before he left, he said, "Don't give him meat. Whatever he is, he's not a predator. Not right now." Later that evening, Gabe returned. This time, he didn't bring firewood. "I saw tire tracks," he said. "Near the back ridge, didn't recognize the tread." Her gut turned. She led him to the fence. The cattails were still there. The footprint had begun to blur in the damp. Someone was watching. She didn't say it aloud, but they both knew. That night, just after midnight, she heard it again. The hum. Longer this time, deeper, like the timbre of an old song rolling through wood. Not mournful, not fearful, just present. Alive, the barn breathed with it. And far beyond the yard, somewhere in the woods, a distant echo answered. Not close, but not far, not yet. Under the heavy stillness of mid-spring, when the air in Briar Hollow hung damp with last night's fog and the pines creaked like old bones settling, the rumors began to curl through the diners and the feed stores and the gas station lots like smoke nobody wanted to name out loud. The kind of whispers that crawled under screen doors and into late-night phone calls. Something's been seen out there, near the trailhead behind Avery's orchard, down by Bearlick Creek. Royce Calder said it looked like a man, but it wasn't. Said it stood taller than his shed and moved through the brush without snapping a twig. He told it all in a voice that begged to be challenged and dared anyone to try. Said he'd pay good money to whoever pointed him in the right direction. There's always someone listening. At the same time, Iris Malloy sat at her kitchen table, tracing the lip of a chipped mug with her thumb, watching the window. The yard beyond it looked normal. Muddy, sun-streaked, with a few new shoots poking through the thaw. But something in her chest told her the normal was wearing thin. She'd seen the truck again 2 nights ago. Same headlights, same slow roll behind the ridge. She hadn't told Gabe yet, though his silence lately said he already suspected. The creature, Orin, she'd started calling him now, though not out loud, not where he could hear, was beginning to eat again. Not much, not often, and never anything she offered directly, but enough to know he was trying. Wild berries, honey-soaked oats, water steeped with pine bark. He ignored meat completely. She'd tried fish once, laid beside the berries. He'd pushed it away with the back of his hand. Not violent, just firm, like he knew exactly what he wanted to be, and it didn't include blood. That morning she found him leaning against the barn's center beam, eyes half closed, breath even. The swelling in his leg had gone down. He'd stopped flinching when she entered the room. More and more he stayed upright, sitting or stretching slow, painful limbs in silence. Once, she thought she saw him press his palm to the wall and take a long, deliberate breath, like someone remembering a home they hadn't seen in years. Later that afternoon, Gabe came by again. This time, he brought hardware. Reinforcements for the barn door, extra nails, a thick canvas tarp to line the roof in case the storms came early. He didn't say much, just moved like a man who knew what danger looked like and wanted to be ahead of it. Afterward, over coffee that neither of them touched, he glanced at her hands and asked, "You sleepin' okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the drawer near the sink, pulled out a piece of jagged metal with a broken chain still hanging from one end. Gabe took it from her wordlessly, ran his fingers over the surface. There were initials carved near the base. Small, faint, but clear. R.C. Gabe's voice was quiet. "That's Royce Calder's mark." Iris nodded once. Gabe stood, took the piece of metal, tucked it inside his coat. "I'll take care of it." She followed him to the porch. The late sun turned the field gold and soft, but there was tension in the air that no light could melt. As he reached the truck, she called after him. "He's not what people think." Gabe paused, then said, "I know, that's why I'm still here." That evening she stayed later than usual in the barn. Orin was awake, watching her with eyes that seemed older than the trees. She sat on the stool near the stove, reading again. Not to him, but near him. And when she set the book down, he made the sound again. That low hum that seemed to pull the heat from the wood and turn it into something like prayer. She didn't speak, just listened. Let the rhythm settle her bones. Let the fire answer him with its own small music. At first, she thought she imagined it. A flicker at the edge of her sight. A movement past the slats in the barn wall. But when she stood and opened the side door, the cold wind rushed in hard, and the grass by the fence was flattened. Large, deep prints in the soil. Larger than Orin's. Set wide apart like something massive had been pacing there. There were no calls, no howls, no breathing. Just the hum, still low inside the barn, still steady, as if Orin had known all along. She turned back to him, eyes wide. He looked at her, then past her, to the door. And something in that glance said what he didn't have words for. He wasn't alone, and neither was she. Over the next few days, the forest seemed to lean in closer. More birds stayed silent. The trail behind the ridge began to feel watched. One morning, Gabe returned from town with tight shoulders and bad news. He'd heard Royce bragging at the diner. Said he was setting more traps, closer this time. Said something about a sighting near Bearlick Creek, near Iris's land. His tone had shifted. Less wonder, more possession. He didn't want proof. He wanted a prize. Iris clenched the railing of the porch until her knuckles went white. Gabe watched her, waited, then said, "What do you call him?" She looked up, startled. "The one in the barn," he clarified. "You've got a name for him, don't you?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Orin." Gabe nodded once, like that settled something. "I'll help," he said. "You don't need to ask." That night they dug around the barn, moved stones, stacked logs along the west wall, added brush to cover the tracks that led in. By dawn, the entrance looked like nothing more than an old storage shed, forgotten by time and overgrown. But it wouldn't be enough for long. Inside, Orin had begun to stretch his limbs again. Stand, though barely. His leg trembled under his weight, but he bore it. Iris stood beside him, offering a shoulder when he faltered. He didn't take it, but he didn't push it away either. At one point, as the light from the roof slats caught his face, she paused, really looked, not at the fur or the size or the scars, but at the expression, the way his brow furrowed when he heard birdsong, the slight pull at the corners of his mouth when she spoke gently, the way he tilted his head toward the wind, like it carried stories he'd once known. The face was not a monster's, it was not an ape's. It was a man's, wild, yes, but full of thought, emotion, pain, and something she couldn't quite name. When she said his name out loud for the first time, he blinked once. Then again, "Orin," she repeated. His gaze met hers. Then slowly, he brought his hand to his chest, touched it, then lowered it. Her breath caught. He understood. The next morning, new footprints appeared, larger again, near the back fence. 3 sets. One stayed close. The other 2 veered toward the creek. Iris followed them just far enough to see the bend in the trail, then turned back. She didn't need to know where they led. She already knew who they belonged to. She stepped into the barn and found Orin seated upright, spine straighter, head lifted. He didn't hum, but the quiet around him felt like the silence before a storm. Charged, waiting. Gabe arrived just before sunset, face dark. "He set a line of traps from Bearlick to your east boundary," he said. "They're bigger this time, meaner." "Who?" she asked, though she already knew. "Royce." That night, the barn didn't feel like shelter. It felt like a front line. Iris stood at the window for hours, eyes on the woods. Orin never slept, just sat, alert, listening. When the wind changed direction, it carried the scent of blood. And in the distance, far beyond the ridge, something answered with a sound that didn't echo, but carried. Not a roar, not a growl, just a low, haunting rumble, deep enough to rattle the glass and settle in her ribs. Orin rose, slow and shaky, turned his face toward the night. He knew. So did she. They weren't the only ones trying to survive this valley anymore, and the others were getting closer. Under the weight of summer rain, the forest changed. What had once been soft and waking in the spring turned heavy with mud and swollen streams. The sky rarely held its color for long. Gray to black, black to flash, flash to thunder, and the trees moaned low as if remembering things they'd buried. Briar Hollow hadn't seen this much rain in years. Roads washed out overnight. The creek behind Iris Malloy's land burst its banks and slashed wide ribbons through the field where deer used to wander at dusk. And in the middle of it all, Iris woke one morning to the hollow silence of air, too still for safety. The kind that meant the ground had more to say than the sky. Orin had grown stronger. Slowly, then suddenly. He could walk now, though his left leg still trembled under pressure. His shoulders had filled out again. His posture no longer curled with pain. In the mornings, Iris found him at the edge of the barn, watching the fog spill over the field, like breath from an unseen animal. He didn't hum as often, not in the way he used to, but the sound lived in the walls now, low, steady, almost protective. Sometimes at night, she'd hear it pulsing like a second heartbeat beneath the rain. That afternoon, Gabe arrived in a rush. His boots soaked, hair plastered to his face, eyes sharp with a kind of fear that didn't speak right away. He dropped his satchel near the porch and didn't wait for coffee. "I saw Royce," he said. "He's been out near the old logging bridge. Said something about flushing it out. He was drunk, mean, but I don't think he's bluffing." Iris glanced out the window. The clouds hung like bruises, thick and low. "Flushing what out?" she asked, though she knew. "He thinks Orin's near," Gabe said. "He's not alone out there either. I saw 2 others with him. They've got dogs, traps, rifles wrapped in tarps." Iris closed her eyes for a long second. "Which bridge?" "The one behind the pasture, about half a mile east." She moved before her mind could catch up, grabbing her coat, a rope, the heavy flashlight that still worked. Gabe was already pulling on his gloves. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Gabe agreed, "but we can." They made it to the trailhead fast, the path slick with runoff. Every step a gamble. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the wind was thick with it. Trees bent with warning. As they neared the rise above the wooden bridge, a noise cracked through the rain. A yell. Sharp, startled. Then something worse. A scuffle. A shout turning into a scream. They ran. Down the incline, boots sliding through wet leaves, breath snagging on the wind. At the bridge, Royce was standing with his back to a broken railing, his rifle on the ground. Mud covered his knees. One dog was gone. The other barked wildly, circling the clearing. And just beyond them, struggling against the pull of the swollen river, was Gabe. He'd fallen. His left leg had caught in a split timber below the bridge, the current trying to wrench him loose like a branch. Royce stood frozen, face pale. The others, gone. Maybe fled. Maybe worse. "Help him!" Iris screamed, rushing forward. But Royce didn't move. Then the trees behind them cracked, not from thunder. From weight. From motion. From something moving toward them. Orin emerged from the tree line like a shadow shaking itself free. Mud slicked his fur, rain carving paths down his chest. He limped, still, but with purpose. His eyes were locked on Gabe. He didn't look at Iris, didn't look at Royce. He moved straight to the edge of the bridge and dropped to one knee, grabbing the rope from her hand without a word. His fingers worked fast, tying it around the beam, then around his waist. Iris tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. He stepped into the river. The current slammed into him, but he braced. The water was high, angry, and cold enough to bite. Orin reached Gabe just as the timber gave way, pulling the young man free and holding him against his chest like a child. The rope went taut. Iris held fast, digging her heels into the mud. Royce stumbled forward at last, adding his weight to the pull. Together they hauled them both back. When Orin reached the shore, he collapsed to one knee, chest heaving, arms still wrapped tight around Gabe. The boy was conscious, barely. his lips blue, his eyes wild. Orin lowered him gently onto the grass, then looked up and saw Royce. They stared at each other across the space of years, of blood, of rusted steel. Royce opened his mouth, but no sound came out, and then the lightning split the sky wide open. In that white flash, a second figure appeared at the tree line. Taller, broader, still. Bram, not walking, not moving, just watching. The same amber eyes, bright and alive, caught the stormlight like polished stones. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. Iris felt something pull in her chest. A recognition, a certainty. Orin turned his head toward the figure. Didn't speak, didn't move. But his breath slowed, and for a moment, everything was still. The rain, the wind, the men, the river. Then Bram turned, melted back into the trees like smoke. Gone. Royce dropped to his knees, covered his face with his hands. The rifle lay forgotten in the mud. Gabe coughed, curled inward, shivering. Iris wrapped the rope around his shoulders, pulled him close. She didn't look back at Royce. Orin stood again. Barely. Blood streaked his side from where the river had ripped the bandage loose, but he didn't flinch. He just looked at the boy, then at Iris, then past them both, toward the woods where his father had vanished. Iris reached out, rested her hand on his arm. The rain softened, not because the storm was done, but because something had passed. That night, back at the barn, Gabe lay on the cot under the old wool blanket, face flushed but safe. The fire cracked in the stove. Orin sat nearby, silent, watching, breathing. Iris cleaned his wounds again, rewrapped the bandage. Her hands worked slowly, carefully. This time, he didn't look away. She didn't ask what he saw in the trees. She didn't need to. The sound of the river still lived in her chest, and the way Bram had appeared, without warning, without sound, left something behind that no words could touch. She stepped outside after midnight. The air was cool, clean. Somewhere far off, an owl called once. Then silence. By the fence, the cattails were still standing. Wet, whole. She touched one with the tips of her fingers, then looked back at the barn. Inside, the light was low, and someone, somewhere, was humming. Under the brittle heat of late August, the land around Briar Hollow cracked. Rain hadn't touched the hills in nearly 2 weeks, and the air had turned sharp and dry, humming with static. Even the birds seemed to vanish during the day, the wind too tired to carry their songs. The fields behind Iris Malloy's farm, once flush with wildflowers and soft green, had browned to tinder, and the scent of pine was thickened by something more dangerous. Smoke, distant but creeping. It hadn't rained since the flash floods, and what the storm left behind, the sun had scorched away. Every morning she stepped out onto her porch with a hand over her eyes, watching the tree line like it might speak. The barn remained quiet, but not still. Orin had recovered more than anyone thought possible. The limp in his leg was nearly gone, replaced by a slow, deliberate gait that carried a quiet strength. He no longer needed support to walk, no longer looked over his shoulder as if waiting for the woods to reclaim him. His silence was steady now, less a symptom of pain and more a kind of choice. He still watched everything. The clouds, the wind, the sound of tires on gravel. Especially the sound of tires on gravel, because Royce hadn't gone far. After the flood, he'd disappeared for a while. Long enough for Iris to hope maybe the river had changed something in him. But hope didn't last long in dry heat. Rumors swirled again, this time sharper, uglier, that he'd seen something unnatural, that the fire season was starting early because of those things in the woods, that he'd found claw marks on trees and blamed it on what he called the monster. And monsters always needed hunting. Gabe heard the talk at the feed store. Dr. Hale heard it at the post office. Iris heard it when no one was talking to her at all. That afternoon, Gabe was stacking firewood when the first curl of smoke rose from the ridge behind Hollow Creek. At first it looked like fog, thin and pale. drifting sideways. But then came the smell, resin and ash. And then the wind changed. That was all it took. Iris stood at the edge of the porch, eyes fixed on the far hill, her breath caught just below her ribs. "It's not controlled," Gabe said beside her, his voice tight. "And it's moving fast." She was already moving before he finished speaking. In the barn, Orin was alert, upright, head tilted toward the wind like he could hear the fire thinking. Iris grabbed her coat, even though the heat was unforgiving, and slammed the feed bin shut. "We have to get out," she said. "Now." But Orin didn't move. He looked past her, toward the smoke beyond the ridge. And then, like something had cracked open, he stepped past her, out the barn door, toward the pasture. "Iris!" Gabe shouted from behind, pointing. Across the dry field, near the fence line, a figure stumbled through the smoke. Not a person. Not quite. It was big, heavier in the shoulders. Soot streaked across patches of dark fur. And when it fell forward with a pained cry, Iris knew. It was another one, smaller than Bram, not Orin, a female. She was trying to crawl under the lower barbed line of the fence, her arm wrapped tight around something pressed to her chest. A shape that shifted, moved. A child. Orin ran. His legs didn't falter now, not once. He reached the fence line just as the mother collapsed, her breath ragged, body shaking. The fire was already painting the sky orange behind her. She tried to lift herself again, but couldn't. Iris ran too, Gabe behind her. Dr. Hale's truck kicking up dust as it bounced through the pasture gate. Smoke poured from the trees like water bursting through a dam. And then, like it had all waited for the moment they were too far to stop it, the barn roof caught. A dull roar, then crackling, then flames licking skyward as if hungry for all they hadn't burned. Iris stopped, heart seizing. But Orin didn't look back. He reached the fallen mother, dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms beneath her shoulders, and pulled. She cried out, soft, hoarse, barely more than a breath. The child, no more than 2 feet tall, wrapped in a sling of woven bark, let out a frightened whimper. The barn groaned behind them. Wood split. Gabe shouted something, barely audible over the wind and heat. Dr. Hale leapt from his truck with a fire blanket and a crowbar, running to meet them halfway. Smoke blurred the edges of everything, and then, from the trees, Bram appeared. Massive, silent. He didn't run. He moved like the mountain itself had decided to step forward, shoulders heaving, eyes fixed on the fire. He crossed the pasture in fewer strides than a man could count, reached the barn just as the ridge beam collapsed inward. Without hesitation, he dropped beneath it, caught the falling timber across his back, held. Orin pulled the female free. Iris grabbed the child, cradling it to her chest, feeling the heat bite into her arms. Dr. Hale threw the fire blanket over them, and Bram, still holding the burning beam with both shoulders, locked eyes with Iris across the flame. There was no fear in his face, only something older, deeper, resigned. Then, as the others cleared the barn's edge, he let go and vanished in the smoke. The blast of heat that followed knocked them sideways. Everything blurred. Ash rained from the sky like black snow. By nightfall, the barn was nothing but cinders and warped nails. The wind had shifted again, sending the worst of the fire east, away from the homestead. Fire crews arrived too late to stop the blaze, but early enough to ask questions. Iris said what she had to. Lightning, she told them. Old wiring. She didn't lie. Not really. Not when the fire had started from hate. Royce was nowhere to be found. But his old pickup was spotted parked crooked at the base of Dead Man's Hollow. Back tires stuck in the sand, shotgun missing from the rack. No one asked why there were barefoot prints near the tree line, too large to belong to any man. In the days after, the mother recovered slowly. They kept her hidden, moved her to the cellar beneath the root house. Orin stayed close, guarded, slept in short bursts near the steps, always between her and the door. The child, wide-eyed and silent, clung to Iris with an ease that broke her heart. She rocked it in her arms at night, not speaking, not singing, just breathing, because somehow that was enough. Gabe helped rebuild what they could, hauled the rest of the scorched wood out back. Dr. Hale brought poultices and salves, spoke less and did more. The days blurred, the wind cooled, the nights lengthened. And still, every evening before dark, Iris walked to the edge of the field, placed a small bundle of cattails beneath the scorched fence post. Every time, the next morning, they were gone. Not blown, not taken by animals. Gone. Replaced, once, by a stone. Smooth, palm-sized, with a single line scratched across the center. She didn't know what it meant, but she kept it on her nightstand. That next week, Royce's truck was found again, empty, its doors wide open, keys still in the ignition, blood on the steering wheel, but no body, no prints, no answers. And at night, when the wind rose just enough to bend the reeds, Iris would pause, hand on the porch rail, and listen. Sometimes she swore she heard it again, that hum. Lower now, deeper, not lonely, not lost, but warning. Under the brittle hush of early October, Briar Hollow fell into a strange kind of silence. Not the soft quiet of leaves falling or the hush that comes before frost. This was deeper, hollowed out, like the woods were holding their breath. The birds had thinned. The creek sounded farther away than usual, and sometimes, just past dusk, a long, low vibration came rolling down the timberline. Less a sound, more a pulse that rattled the ribs without ever touching the ear. Iris Malloy stood on her porch with a blanket over her shoulders and one hand curled around a chipped mug, listening. The hum came every evening now, somewhere up in the rock breaks above the ridge, sometimes closer, sometimes faint. It reminded her of a cello string pulled just shy of snapping. It didn't frighten her, but it made her feel small in a way she hadn't in years. Inside the root cellar, Sable was healing. Her breath had steadied, her strength returning in slow inches. She still didn't speak, didn't hum like Orin, but she watched everything, especially the child. The little one had grown restless, tugging at the wooden slats, tracing the beams above them, sometimes chirping under her breath like a frog or a bird that hadn't picked a song yet. Orin stayed close. He didn't hover, just stayed within reach, like a tether. That morning, Iris found Gabe checking the perimeter. His boots were caked in ash from the burn scar, his face shadowed under a sweat-stained ball cap. He didn't speak until she handed him a thermos. "I saw Royce," he said. 2 nights ago." Her chest tightened. He was walking the trail just below Dead Man's Hollow, alone, carrying that old Remington. Iris stared out at the pasture. The grass had started to recover, patches of green pushing through the black soil like it didn't remember being burned. She wanted to believe Royce had gone, or been changed, but evil didn't always vanish. Sometimes it crouched, waiting for the ground to soften. "He saw you?" she asked. "No, but he was following something." Later that day, she left food on the cellar steps. Fresh water, a little boiled squash, a handful of dried apples. She added a piece of leather with wild mint tied in a knot, the kind Sable had once reached for with a slow, deliberate breath. When she returned to the barn, Orin was gone. Not far. His prints led up toward the timberline where the pines thinned and the cliffs began. She followed them until she heard it again, that sound. Low, measured, rhythmic. The hum. It came from the rocks now. A cavern or cleft, hidden in the stone, the kind deer bed down in or bears curl into during late snow. Iris didn't climb further. She just stood in the trees, hand pressed to the trunk of a dying fir, listening. The hum echoed back at her, not exactly in the same shape. A second voice. Not Orin, not Bram. Another. It stopped her breath cold. The forest answered. That night Gabe came to the door in a sweat, his face pale under the porch light. "He's gone up there," he said. "Royce. He's got dogs this time. I followed the prints." Saw a campfire just above the quarry cut. Iris grabbed her coat. Then we go. You sure? I'm not leaving them up there alone. By the time they reached the timberline, the light had drained from the trees. The moon was thin, but the sky clear, casting everything in a pale silver sheen. The forest felt brittle underfoot. Branches cracking, ground dry. Every sound hung too long. At the edge of a rock shelf, Gabe paused, crouched behind a thick cluster of ferns. There, Royce was moving slowly through the brush, his breath visible in the cold. His rifle was strapped to his shoulder. His eyes scanned the shadows with a hunter's focus. But his step was off, uneven, nervous, like something was watching him back. "He's following the sound," Iris whispered. "He hears it too." Then another voice rose from the trees. "Stop right there," Dr. Hale said from behind them. Iris jumped, turning. He stepped out from the shadows, brow tight, hands empty. But his gaze was firm. "You didn't think I'd let you two walk into this alone, did you?" he said. He held up a leather-wrapped bundle, an old set of braces and splints, handmade, meant for weight distribution. "For Orin," he said. "You said his gait was off." Before Iris could answer, a gunshot rang out through the trees. Not a warning, not a miss. The echo rolled down the ridge and struck her in the gut. They ran. The dogs were barking now, 3 of them, scrambling through undergrowth like they'd caught a scent and lost it again. Royce was shouting, cursing. The second shot was louder. It lit the whole ridge for a heartbeat. Iris climbed fast, her hands scraping on stone. Gabe hauled her up, Hale behind them, and when they crested the top of the ridge, they saw it. Royce stood in the clearing, his rifle aimed. Sable had stepped forward from the rocks, one arm raised, not to fight, not to shield, just raised. Orin lunged in from the side. The shot hit his shoulder. He fell to one knee. Iris screamed his name, felt it leave her throat raw. Before Royce could chamber another round, something massive moved behind him. Bram. The moon caught him just right, fur gleaming wet, shoulders heaving. In his hand, twisted like a child's toy, was one of the old bear traps Iris thought she'd buried months ago. He stepped forward, silent. Royce turned, and Bram didn't strike. He didn't growl. He didn't break the man in half. He simply held out the trap and snapped it in half with one clean, steady motion. The sound it made, metal giving up, was louder than the shots. Royce froze. Something cracked in his face, something that had held together too long. He dropped the rifle, dropped to his knees, mouth trembling, and he wept. Not loud, not broken, just like a man who'd lost his story and didn't know how to start over. Bram stepped back. Orin rose slowly, his shoulder bleeding, breath jagged. Iris ran to him, wrapped her arms around his ribs, felt the rise and fall, warm, alive. Dr. Hale reached Sable, checked her eyes, her pulse. She nodded once, barely. No one spoke, not for a long time. Then Bram turned to Iris and lowered his head. It wasn't deep, it wasn't grand, but it was human. A thank you that didn't need translation. She bowed her head back. The wind moved through the trees. The hum returned, quieter now, further, but steady. And the forest, for the first time in weeks, exhaled. Under a sky drained pale by the first frost, Briar Hollow exhaled into winter. The kind of cold that didn't shout but whispered its way into the joints of old barns and the corners of bedrooms, turning breath into memory. The fields lay silent. Frost clung to the cattails in delicate white threads, and every plank, every stone, every brittle branch seemed to hold something in place. Like if it moved, it would break the spell that had, for now, kept things from falling apart. But spells wear thin when men carry hate longer than grief. And across town, Royce Calder hadn't forgotten anything. Iris Malloy moved slower these days. Not because of age, but because everything around her asked her to. The baby Bigfoot, whom she now called Moss, for the way he clung to her in silence and soft green eyes, had grown stronger, climbing onto hay bales, giggling into his own knuckles. Sable healed, though she never spoke. Just pressed her hand against Iris's cheek one night and left it there long enough to mean something. Orin had returned to the barn, standing taller now, scarred but centered, like a tree that had been through fire and come out ash instead of splinters. And Bram had not been seen again, not fully, but Iris still found fresh cedar needles by the back fence, arranged in circles, too deliberate for wind or animal. Something still watched, but not with harm. Gabe came by often, hammering new posts, checking tracks, fixing gates before the freeze made everything stiff. He brought news too, of quiet muttering in town, whispers in the diner, tension humming beneath church pews. Royce hadn't left. He was quieter, yes, but not still. He'd gathered men, ones who owed him favors, ones who didn't care what the hunt meant, just that it paid. And now they were waiting for the first true snow, that cold silence that made tracks speak louder than anything else. Iris didn't sleep well. Her dreams were full of ash and humming. She watched the smoke from her stove curl toward the ceiling and thought of Bram holding the burning beam on his shoulders. She thought of Orin stepping in front of a bullet. And she thought of Royce crying, not from guilt, but from the weight of being seen. Then one morning, snow did come. Not heavy, but enough to dust the earth and make every print a language. Gabe was the first to notice. The tire tracks near the back gate, thin enough to avoid the main road, wide enough to mean a truck, and boot prints, several, leading down toward the lower field, toward the barn. Iris tightened her scarf, locked the cellar, tucked Moss into a quilt, and stood outside the house, facing east, wind in her teeth. Gabe loaded his shotgun but didn't speak. Not yet. They knew. Royce wasn't going to let the winter settle before making his move. And this time, he wouldn't come at night. He wanted an end. Something that could be shown, or killed. They didn't wait for him. That Sunday, Iris put on her coat and walked into the center of town, into the wooden church with the crooked steeple, the one she hadn't stepped inside since Harold died. People turned, people whispered, but she didn't stop. She stepped up to the pulpit where Pastor Reams had just opened his book. "I have something to say," she said, loud enough that it didn't need permission. Silence answered. She spoke of Orin, of the night of the flood, of the fire, of the trap that had nearly torn his leg in half. She told them how he pulled Gabe from the river, how Bram had held a burning roof while they escaped, how Sable shielded a child that wasn't hers, how every creature they feared had shown more mercy than the men who hunted them. She told them about Royce, about the bullet, about the moment he looked into Orin's face and dropped the gun. "He wept," she said, voice breaking, "because he saw what he had become." For a moment, no one moved. Then someone coughed. Someone else stood up. An older woman Iris didn't know by name, then another, and another. They didn't speak, just stood. Half the room remained seated, but half stood. That night, Gabe posted lookouts on the road to the barn. Doc Hale slept in his truck. Iris sat with Orin by the stove, holding Moss against her chest. The baby hummed softly, a low sound that rolled through her bones like memory. Orin listened, then touched his hand to the floor, palm down, eyes closed. The hum echoed back, but something in it changed. Outside, the night was too still. Then came the engine, just before dawn. A low rumble up the creek path. Old tires over frozen gravel. No headlights, no voices. Just quiet. Orin was up before she moved. He stepped out into the yard, bare against the cold. Gabe met him halfway. Then Iris saw it. Tracks leading away from the barn. Deep, wide, Orin's, pulling something behind them. She realized then he'd left a trail. On purpose, they weren't coming for the barn. They were coming for him, and he'd made sure they wouldn't find the others. Iris shouted his name, but he was already gone. By the time the first gunshot cracked, she was running. Through snow, over the stone bridge, down the ice-slick slope toward the frozen creek. She heard barking, yelling, then silence. When she reached the clearing, the air felt electric. Royce stood at the edge of the old footbridge, hands out, face slack. One of his men lay in the creek, breathing, moaning. The others gone. And there, at the far end of the bridge, stood Orin, soaked in snowmelt, but upright, holding Gabe in one arm, dragging Royce by the jacket with the other. He laid them both on the bank, stepped back, and waited. Royce pushed himself up, coughing, looked into Orin's face, the human-like wildman face, snow clinging to the short beard, the fur darkened by blood, not fresh, those amber eyes, not angry, not even sad, just quiet, like a question. Royce stared back for a long time, then dropped his head. He began to cry, not out of fear, not this time. He set the rifle down, whispered, "I'm sorry," and no one moved, not even the wind. When the others came, Hale, Iris, two of the standing men from town, no one asked questions. They carried Royce home. The other man, too. No arrests, no accusations, just a long, cold walk back. The sun came up behind the ridge, gold and soft against the frost, and for the first time in weeks, the woods didn't hum. They sang. Under the pale breath of late winter, when the frost gave way to dew and the creek thawed just enough to carry sound again, Briar Hollow began to stir. Not loudly, not all at once, but like something old in the soil remembered how to live. Snow retreated from the fields in patches, revealing brown earth and the first timid green tips of grass. The wind smelled like wet stone and cedar bark, and from the edge of the refuge fence, just past the bend where the old barn used to stand, footprints melted into the thawed dirt and vanished among the trees. The township met quietly that March. No announcements, no brass plaques, just a rusted folding table in the back of the courthouse and a handful of tired voices speaking plain truths. Iris Malloy sat with her shoulders square, her hair pulled back, the same threadbare coat she'd worn all winter folded across her lap. Gabe stood to her left. Dr. Hale sat near the door, sipping cold coffee from a chipped thermos, nodding along like he'd already made peace with the outcome. Nobody mentioned the word Bigfoot. Nobody needed to. They said wildlife refuge and protection zoning and post-trauma recovery. They said veterans retreat and rehabilitation corridor for displaced species. But Iris knew. Everyone in the room knew. It was a treaty, a promise written between the silences. And, for once, that was enough. The land along Bear Lick Creek, 37 acres of tangled pine, floodplain, and forgotten pasture, was officially transferred into protection under a local wildlife conservancy, aided quietly by an anonymous donor. Royce Calder's name didn't come up, but he showed up that morning with a shovel slung over one shoulder and mud already on his boots. He didn't speak. He just nodded at Iris once, then knelt by the southern fence line and began pulling the old steel traps he'd once set himself, one by one. Coil springs rusted, jaws warped. Some he recognized, others he didn't, but he buried every single one. And when he was done, he stayed. Not out of penance, not obligation, but something softer, something harder to name. By the second week of thaw, the new fence was halfway finished. Gabe took charge of the posts, measured twice, drove deep. The kind of work that made the back ache and the hands split, but the kind he liked. He whistled sometimes when he worked, not for joy, just rhythm. The sound drifted across the hills and sometimes came back different, echoed in low tones through the timberline. Not exactly human, not quite not. On the third morning, he found a small bundle of moss and cedar twigs laid neatly beside the post hole, wrapped in bark, tied with sinew. He didn't speak of it, just tucked it into his pocket and kept working. Dr. Hale, now half retired, came by on Sundays, carried satchels of dried herbs, leather braces, bits of bandage, and things that didn't belong in any store. He never asked where to bring them. He just set them down near the field's edge, beside the old cattail marker. The same spot Iris visited each morning with her offering. One fresh bundle of reeds, bound in silence, left beneath the split cedar post like a promise. And every morning, the previous bundle was gone. The refuge grew not with structures, but with space. There were no buildings, only land allowed to breathe. A section near the creek was roped off with yellow flagging, left wild. The stream that once nearly drowned Gabe was cleared of debris and lined with flat stepping stones. At the far end of the property, they erected a wooden sign. No fanfare, just a hand-painted message that read, Briar Hollow, Refuge. For the wounded and the wild. Enter with quiet hands. No one claimed to have carved it. It just appeared. Moss had grown now, almost a year old, his movements stronger, more confident. He still didn't speak in words, but he sang sometimes, low, breathy, strange. His eyes, that deep forest green, held too much knowing for a child. And when he reached for Iris, arms stretched up and trembling, she always leaned down without hesitation. He was growing fast. But not too fast. Not yet. Sable stayed hidden. The cellar door was unlatched now, always. But she rarely ventured above at the same time as others. Occasionally, Iris caught a glimpse of her across the field, tall, curved in motion, walking upright but with grace no human ever managed. The others never saw, not directly, but everyone knew. There were more now. More than just Orin and Bram. More than the mother and her child. Prints appeared after Rhea. Hums drifted through the valley at dusk. Once, someone spotted a broad figure at the ridge, standing just still enough to be mistaken for stone, and no one chased it. One morning in April, Iris found something new. Not reeds, not moss, but a smooth stone, white and oval, placed gently on the fence post. Scratched across its center, faint but careful, was the outline of a hand. 5 fingers, short thumb, human-like, but too wide, too flat, too wild. She ran her thumb across it and didn't speak for a long time. That evening she walked the length of the property alone. No coat, no flashlight, just boots and memory. She passed the burned spot where the old barn had once stood. The roof beam, the ashes, the place where Bram held the fire back with his spine. Nothing remained there now but charred grass and a young cedar sapling, green as hope. She passed the river, now calm, and the bridge, rebuilt by volunteers who never asked what had torn it apart. She reached the far fence near the bend in the hill, and stopped. There, on the rise, stood a shape. Still, massive, not threatening, just watching. It didn't move as she approached. Didn't retreat. The air between them felt charged, like an old wire still humming with current. She saw the face first. Not beast, not shadow. A wild man face, human-like, scarred, noble. Amber eyes caught the moonlight like glass warmed by fire. And in its hand, held not up, not out, but close to its chest, was a child. Smaller, fur redder, face rounder, but eyes the same. Moss looked up, reached a hand toward the figure. No sound, just a breath. Iris stepped back. She didn't cry, didn't smile. She just nodded. And the figure nodded back, then turned, and disappeared into the fog that rolled off the ridge like a curtain being drawn shut. By the time she returned to the house, the sun was barely above the trees. The stove crackled. The scent of pine tea filled the room. Gabe leaned against the door frame with his hands dusty from fence work, and Dr. Hale dozed in the chair, boots crossed at the ankle. Iris sat, didn't speak. The world didn't need it, because some stories don't end in fire. They end in quiet, in the way tracks vanish after thaw, in the reed bundles left for no one, in a song no one remembers learning, but everyone seems to know. That spring, Briar Hollow did not become famous. There were no headlines, no camera crews, no sensational confessions or blurry photos on the internet. There was only breath and silence and one field kept in trust, between those who speak and those who hum. And somewhere in the timberline, the sound of a low rumble echoed once more, not as a warning, not as a cry, but as a goodbye that might one day circle back. In the quiet spaces between what we fear and what we choose to understand, there lives a fragile, powerful truth, one that cannot be caught in a trap or written into law, but only felt in the hush of the woods, the stillness of a sunrise, or the outstretched hand that chooses mercy over might. This story has never truly been about monsters or myths. It's about what happens when a person listens instead of judges, when we step closer to what we've been taught to avoid, and realize the world is much more than we were told. Sometimes the things we don't understand are not here to hurt us, but to teach us, to show us the limits of our fear, the reach of our kindness, and the depth of our shared silence. And sometimes, when we dare to protect something fragile, we discover we are the ones being protected in return. The world is loud with noise, yet it's the quiet that changes us. Not the headlines, but the glances across fences. Not the shouts, but the small offerings left in the snow. Peace is rarely announced. It grows, like moss, like trust, between strangers, between species, between hearts that carry different kinds of loss. We forget sometimes how much we owe to the ones who choose gentleness despite being strong enough not to. And that's the legacy worth holding on to. Not the battles, but the bridges. Not the fire, but the hand that carries water. In the end, what defines us isn't how we conquer the wild, but how we remember our place inside it. With reverence, with humility, with hope. Because no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you carry in your past, there's always room for quiet redemption. Always room for one more story that ends not with a door closing, but with a gate left open. Thank you truly for listening with your heart. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred a memory, a question, or just a feeling you didn't expect, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what stayed with you. And if you'd like to walk deeper into the woods with me, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. More stories wait beneath the trees, and some of them are still listening.